Hello and welcome back to another episode of Finn and Joe's British Show. Today we are talking about the myths of English, or more specifically, the myths of learning English. So, Joe, hello.
Hello, and welcome again to another episode. So, as Finn said, it's all about the myths of learning English. And what do we actually mean? So many students that I've taught, and I guess Finn has taught as well, always come in with this misconception of what is the right way to learn English, and also what is expected of them to learn English. So I guess probably the best one to talk about is every non-native speaker's favorite topic, but every native English teacher's worst topic, and that is grammar. So, grammar is something that I try and avoid in my classes, if I'm honest. Most of my students are advanced, so they've probably mastered most of the grammar rules. But grammar, for me, is like a chain. It's a barrier for a lot of people, not because of what grammar rules they know or the types of grammar they've studied and learnt and can use. But grammar is about rules. And if those rules are broken, there's this idea that you're wrong or you're not good enough. And unfortunately, a lot of students have this obsession with perfect grammar, which can have a massive impact in speaking. What do you reckon, Finn?
Yeah, so I guess it always depends on your goal. If your goal is to take English exams, if you need IELTS, for example, then yes, you want to be a lot more careful of your mistakes because that will affect your score, that will affect your grade. But many of the students that both you and I teach, Joe, IELTS is not their priority. That's not what they're worried about. Their biggest concerns are, say, for me or my students, it's confidence to speak, being able to have a conversation with real people. Joe, for you, it's more about immersion in British culture and fitting in the UK around native speakers. And in both of those contexts, grammar mistakes are really a tiny, tiny issue, if I could even call them an issue. It's something you want to be mindful of, and obviously you shouldn't just go your whole English journey without ever looking at any grammar structure ever again. That's not what we're saying, but it is something that can really restrict you and restrict your progress if it's at the top of your priority list.
Hmm. And a lot of the students I teach often anecdotally tell me about their experiences of learning English back home. And a common feature of this is being punished for mistakes. So if they make mistakes in their grammar, they're stupid, they're not intelligent, they're lazy, and unfortunately, when it comes to learning English with a native speaker, a lot of these students often fear making mistakes all the time. So what happens is if we have a speaking exercise, or even if these students go out into the real world and try and speak, they pause, they freeze, thinking, "Oh, what tense should I use? Is it the present perfect? Is it the past tense? Is it what preposition should I use? Is it this conditional? Is it that conditional?" And what you end up with is really robotic speaking with massive pauses that sounds completely unnatural and really hard to focus on if you're a listener. And because you get these embarrassing moments, those students continue to freeze up because it's like, oh, I'm rubbish because I haven't said the right thing. Therefore, I'm not going to speak again. And unfortunately, this is a consequence of having this fixation with being perfect. And this is something that we're going to touch upon throughout today's episode, is this striving for perfection. Finn, are native Brits perfect, do you think?
Probably the least perfect out of anyone that speaks English at any level. Um, I don't know. Actually, maybe Australians are a little bit worse than us. It depends what dialect of, or I guess area dialect accent within English, within British English, however you want to call it, whichever one you're referring to. But whether it's intentional or unintentional, there are countless native speakers that make mistakes as a part of their usual speech. And sometimes that is just because of how the grammar works in their dialect. Sometimes it's maybe a lack of education and they don't know. Maybe sometimes it's just they aren't really thinking about it or they haven't got or they've already got used to saying something in a certain way because it's easier or it's more natural and because of that they think it's right when it's actually not. So, an example of that, because that was quite a confusing explanation, but it's very common for native speakers to say should of instead of should have. And when you're speaking very quickly, have and of can sound very, very similar. Uh, I should have arrived earlier. I should have arrived earlier. You don't really know which one I'm saying now that I have brought it up. And it should be I should have arrived earlier, not I should have arrived earlier. That's just one clear example of what I'm talking about. And most native speakers would have no idea that that's even a thing. Many native speakers would go their whole lives saying should have and not even think twice about it. Whereas when you're trying to create a perfect sentence as a non-native English speaker or as an English learner, you might stop, you might pause, and whoever you're speaking to might maybe get a little bit frustrated if you're taking ages and just trying to be perfect and you're being very nitpicky at your own at your own sentence structure, at your own language.
Yeah, and just to continue that point, dialect is massive because dialect can influence how people speak across the UK. And one of the things that is fascinating about dialect, so I teach pronunciation to a lot of my advanced students, is how we manipulate grammar in dialect. So where I'm from Derby. So if I want to talk about myself, I might say, "Oh, are you coming with me?" I would say, "Are you coming with us?" Which confuses the hell out of anyone who's just coming into Derby. And it's again the same when instead of saying, "How are you?" I'll say to my students, "How are we? How are we?" And again, they're thinking, what? That's not correct. But it is because I'm deliberately manipulating the language to make it more inclusive. Rather than asking about you, I'm including you. I'm making it more friendly and more personal. And that's not all. If you happen to visit the largest county in England, Yorkshire, they don't use the article the. So when they're saying, instead of saying, I'm going to the shops, you'll hear, I'm going to shops, I'm going to pub, which again goes away from normal grammar convention. So if you're striving for perfection in your writing, yeah, that's good. But when you're speaking, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be clear.
Yeah, exactly. And we have an idiom that is stepping over, hold on, stepping over pounds to pick up pennies. I had to make sure I got it the right way round. And I heard another variation of that the other day to rob Paul to pay Pete, which I thought was quite a funny one. But you basically you don't want to be missing maybe the fundamentals or the priority or the goal, the focus of your speech, of your conversation, and that is to be clear. That is to communicate what is in your head via your mouth, via your words, via the English language. And if you're worrying too much about being perfect and getting everything absolutely correct and maybe backtracking and always correcting yourself and then thinking, oh, is it should have or should have, then you are stepping over the pounds. You're stepping over, I guess, the dollars if you want to do it in American English. So the dollars or the pounds in this case would be clear, confident communication to pick up the pennies, which is absolute perfection. Because if somebody understands you and they can then respond to you, then you are starting the conversation. You're engaging in a real conversation. And being perfect in that situation, that scenario, really doesn't matter.
And it's funny you should mention idioms because that is another myth. If you were to watch every native English content creator on Instagram, idiom, 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 idiom. And if you're someone who really loves these content creators, I won't name any names here, you will think, oh, native Brits use idioms all the time. Do we though? That is a big question. As a native speaker, idioms are a tool that we use. It's like seasoning on food. You can add it to add a bit more creativity and a bit more flavor to your language, but they're simply not as common as a lot of teachers make out. And unfortunately, if you become obsessed with learning idioms, you will sound unnatural by trying to be natural. I know that sounds a bit like a juxtaposition, but for most native speakers, we try and make our language clear. And then we add flavor and substance through using idioms when it's appropriate. But if you really listen out to most younger speakers, so I would probably say me and Finna are younger speakers, idioms are not a huge part of our vocal vocabulary repertoire. We use them. I use idioms, but they're definitely not as common as some make out. Would you agree, Finn?
Yeah, absolutely. And even then, I gave two examples of two different idioms that mean the same thing. I said about stepping over pounds to pick up pennies, and then I said about robbing Pete to pay Paul. It's the same idea, it's just different ways, different flavorful ways, some seasoning to say one thing that could be said in normal, everyday standard English as well. So if you go down the rabbit hole of trying to learn a million different English, million different idioms, if you focus on just learning idioms and that's all you do, and you get a bit lost, you lose your focus, then you kind of overwhelm yourself and you're learning a lot of unnecessary vocabulary, maybe a lot of junk vocabulary, stuff that's kind of occupying your brain space, your brain capacity, and that capacity has better uses when you're, or could be used in better ways when you're trying to become confident and become clear.
Mm. Many people, when they're learning idioms, they learn them based on like categories, they might learn them based on a particular function. But as an English teacher and a native, I would argue the best idioms to learn are the ones that you're likely to hear, not the ones in the textbooks, but the ones that we hear in everyday life, sorry. And I would say over 50% of the most common idioms that you hear in the UK are actually slang phrases as well. So you're actually killing two birds with one stone, which, oh, that's an idiom as well. See, I'm basically lying to you guys. I'm saying I never use idioms or rarely use idioms, and I'm just peppering my speech with them right now. Um, so it's better to learn idioms that are also slang phrases as well, because you get two sides of the coin. Oh, again, idiom. So it's a more efficient way of learning them. So, for instance, in the UK, if someone is annoying you, that person is doing your head in, which is a slang phrase and it's an idiom. So rather than trying to learn, oh, I need to learn slang, I need to learn idioms, learn phrases that fit both categories.
Yeah, you want to use, I guess, functional phrases, ones that actually work, that people actually use. And often, especially with slang or idioms and phrases that people use, if you listen, half of the time you can guess what it means. You can guess from the context because it makes sense. Like you said, you're peppering your speech. If you know that you have your salt and your pepper, and you put the pepper on your food, then you're peppering your speech with idioms. That makes sense. And that's something that you can work out. You can figure it out. And you shouldn't just learn a big list of idioms and think, right, I need to try and fit this into my next conversation, or I'm going to forget how to use it, or if I don't use this one, I'm not going to sound native. You want to listen out for what other people are saying. And you have to remember that everybody has their own set of vocabulary. Everybody uses a certain number of words and phrases in their speech. So just because one person says one phrase doesn't mean that you need to know it and it's something that you need to use. Try and listen out for things that are common, that come up over and over again. And if you don't know what it means, then maybe that's something that you should try and learn and should try and implement into your speech because it might be a very useful one or it might help you in certain situations. But it should be that way around. It shouldn't be learn idioms, force them in. It should be, oh, I'm hearing this. Maybe I should try and learn it.
Hmm. Generally, I would put it into two categories. So, first of all, don't learn idioms that are not going to be useful to you. There's no point learning things like a ballpark figure or the balls in your court and burning the midnight oil. If you don't work in an office environment, it would be a complete waste of your time. Equally, if you find yourself in a situation and you're using the same expression for everything, or you find yourself in a situation where you want to like find a way of expressing expressing yourself in a different way to how you normally were, that's where idioms can actually add substance to your language. And it's about, okay, oh, I know I want to describe this situation. And if the way you describe that situation sounds really, really wordy and really um, waffly. So that's a nice British word to just use so many words without actually saying anything at all. That's when an idiom could come in handy. So idioms are great, but generally, if I were you and you were learning to sound more natural, I would prioritize phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are a hell of a lot more common in British English.
Yeah, and even phrasal verbs can be a little bit complicated. It can be a bit
Mm,
of a slippery slope. It can be a bit
mm,
risky because there's so many of them, and there are ones that we don't use, ones that nobody actually uses, but then there are ones that you can't not use that are essential for kind of basic speech or just getting your point across, being able to explain things. So, again, a good method for learning these or knowing and understanding which ones you should try and memorize. The same thing as before, listen out which ones are the ones that come up over and over again. I think Joe and I have both said listen out a few times in this podcast, so it might be a good idea if you're unfamiliar with it to go away and go away, to go away and look it up and try to understand what it means. So, as you can see, it is very difficult to avoid phrasal verbs. So, if you want to memorize something, memorize phrasal verbs.
Mm. And generally, just a quick tip for memorizing phrasal verbs, context is key. Generally, always think about the scenarios in your life, and that's where you can start focusing on phrasal verbs. So, for instance, everyone cleans their house, so it might be a good idea to learn phrasal verbs to do with cleaning. Everybody has a body, and everybody moves up and down, sits down, stands up, turns around, bends over, whatever. Very useful. And any type of functional language that uses phrasal verbs like go out, come in, head off, come back is likely to be useful. So there's no point learning really complex phrasal verbs that you're very unlikely to hear unless maybe in an exam. As we've said, listen out, pay attention to what natives around you are saying. Or if you don't live in the UK or America or places like that, watch if you have access to American or British films, listen out for what is actually being said. Because if you watch five films and the same phrasal verb keeps on cropping up, it is likely you need to probably write it down.
Yeah, and you have to remember as well about hobbies and interests. So after you've learnt the basic or the essential ones for the most functional phrases, like you're saying, Joe, think about what you spend your time doing and talking about in your native language. Because the best way to practice and improve and become more confident is by using the language with other people. And that can be, I don't know if you're interested in gaming, for example, you might be speaking to people on Xbox or on PlayStation or something. So you want to learn phrasal verbs that are very useful for games, gaming, that type of game, that category, that genre of game. Or maybe you like chess. I don't know, whatever you like. You're probably going to be interacting with people online or watching YouTube videos about chess and about chess strategies and things like that. And then you will notice phrasal verbs coming up for that, and you can also just find vocabulary that is useful for that topic, that activity, that hobby. And once you start to learn them, or start to see them more often, start to expose yourself, then you will notice in your hobby, in your field of interest, you will see, oh, look, there's this word. Oh, there's this phrasal verb. Oh, look, an idiom. I've seen that 5 times in a load of different YouTube videos and articles. Maybe that idiom is very useful for me. So you've always got to think about what you're doing in your own life and what you like, what you're interested in, and just apply that to English.
Hmm. And that comes on to our next point. What is advanced English? Like, obviously, you might hear terms like C1 and C2, which are the CEFR levels, particularly for like exams, that type of thing. And a lot of learners obsess about reaching C1 and C2 level. And to be honest, without sounding too blunt, native speakers really have no idea what you're talking about if you're saying C1, C2. These levels look good on paper, but in reality, they're not as important as people make out. And even in modern English and modern English teaching, the focus is shifting. Whereas in the past, C1 and C2 would imply more advanced, rarer words, vocabulary, phrases. Now, C1 and C2 is coming. into the modern world. And it's more to do with slang, informal phrases, and something that we will probably talk about in another episode, nuance, which is how you take the language that you may know, you may have learned earlier in your language learning journey, and applying it in different situations. And this is a huge part of understanding native speakers. If we take the word take can mean to to get an object and transport it to another place. So, oh, could you take this coffee to your dad who's who's watching the football in the living room? But take could also be, how do you have your coffee? So, do you take it with milk? Do you have it with milk? Do you have it with sugar? So that is the nuance of the language. And for me, as an English teacher, nuance is so important for fluency.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people imagine C2 as this sort of mystical, unattainable level that uses Shakespearean language, that uses words that are just big, very formal, that are just very descriptive versions of more basic, more simple vocabulary. Sentences that I probably couldn't even come up with or create off the top of my head because the language is either very old or it's very academic, very maybe scientific, something like that, using lots of big, big words. And that's not really what it is. And you really don't want to be learning that because not only is it extremely difficult, it isn't useful for you at all. It might get you your C2 level, but it's really, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So you're just causing problems for yourself. It causes more problems than it's worth. So you want to focus on the slang if you're really getting to those upper levels within the CEFR framework. That's hard to say, isn't it? The European framework. I'm going to go with that. The European framework. Um, you want to focus a bit more on the slang, using words that native speakers really do use that aren't just simple and basic words and basic vocabulary.
And as I touched upon it when we were just talking about this, there's a reason what these numbers mean. So when people say C1, C2, it isn't this like magical um, level of intelligence. What it actually means is rarity. If a word is in C2, guys, let's be honest, you're probably very unlikely to hear it in everyday English. But C1 and C2 should actually be changed, in my opinion. It doesn't really exist in terms of the conversational English, everyday English. It's more to do with, I would call it native level rather than C1, C2. So native level could be slang, it could be grammar, which is seen as advanced, but we do it naturally. So speaking of grammar, people prioritize the wrong things. These really advanced structures that we very rarely use. But one area of C1 grammar is vague language. So, vague language is when you talk about something in a very unclear way. So, for instance, I might say to Finn, "Oh, I'm really, really busy this weekend, Finn. I've got a lot of stuff going on." Like, Finn will probably look at me like, "What? What do you mean?" Like, am I just trying to be deliberately evasive, or is it just a more efficient way of speaking? And that is how native speakers use it. So you're far better using vague language, even ellipsis. So ellipsis is where you take whole sections of text out. If it's sort of aware, if it's people are sort of aware of what you're talking about. You might see it if you like reading novels, like dot dot dot. at the end of a text. And again, that is really common because if you like texting someone and they and they put those three dots, oh dear. Oh dear. It's almost like thinking, but Facebook actually causes a lot of anxiety for a lot of people because they use ellipsis when someone's typing. So you might have sent a text, you might have sent a message to someone, and it's probably quite a rude message or insult or something, and then you see those dot, those ellipsis, and you think, oh God, that is advanced grammar, but you're going to see it in everyday life.
Yeah, I think texting and the, the world of digital conversations is a whole different world. It perhaps even requires its own sort of conversation because I think there's definitely a very big generational difference that comes into play with texting and text speak and what's considered normal for adults or older adults compared to younger adults compared to children, for example. And then you have emojis as well, which is a whole other thing because in different languages, different emojis are used for different things. And there are different, I guess, rules of what's considered polite and what's considered not considered impolite. So, for example, I always used to get annoyed at my parents when they would open a message and not respond. And I could see on WhatsApp or whatever it is that they opened my message 2 hours ago. And then if I call my mum and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you ignoring me?" And then she'd say, "Oh, I was just busy. I just opened it and I was busy and I'll reply later." But I think for younger people, if someone's just ignored your message, they've opened it and left it, it's like they're actually ignoring you. It's like, "Oh, okay, I've had the time to open it and read it, but I'm not going to respond. You're not important to me." And there's that sort of thing that's a kind of subconscious kind of, I don't know, those subconscious rules that we have created and adapted. So basically, long story short, tech speak is a whole other world. But yeah, what do you think, Joe?
Yeah, and that brings on to something which a lot of teachers don't cover, and it's culture, behavior, non-verbal communication. That is equally as important as learning grammar and vocabulary, or slang or idioms, because what we were describing there is subconscious anxiety that a lot of younger people get now because it makes them think of being ghosted. So being ghosted is really modern slang, and it's this idea where someone just disappears after out of your life after speaking to them. And it's commonly associated with the dating scene. So generally, a lot of this behavior of people reading messages and then not replying, it adds to this anxiety. And reading between the lines and guessing behavior and guessing tone and guessing mentality. Is it sarcastic? Is it genuine? This is all to do with understanding. And you can't do that through watching movies. You can't do that through having English lessons per se. You can do it by being around native speakers. And you can't even get it through texting, even if you love texting, because I might read a text from Finn and I might think, oh, it's being really sarcastic, even though he wasn't. So this is a myth in English learning that you need to prioritize grammar, vocabulary, that type of thing, learning idioms, slang, not necessarily. Culture, and I'm a bit biased because I'm a cultural integration coach, but culture is the gateway to understanding native speakers.
Yeah, and I'm going to plug myself here as well. And what I am, I'd say I'm a bit more of a confidence coach, I guess. I just like to encourage people to take that first step. So to to help them get involved in different conversations, different areas, different, I don't know, online chess forums, to use the example from earlier. And many people are just very scared of doing that because of what you said, Joe, about the grammar and the things like that, when that's really not what they should be worrying about. You've got bigger issues, bigger things to worry about if you're too scared to be typing loads, even if you're scared about making loads of mistakes in your message, or if you're speaking to friends or you want to have a meeting with someone, but you're too scared to speak, then you're focusing on the wrong things.
Mm. And a lot of people, particularly those who live in English speaking countries, I don't mean to cause you any anxiety here, but having perfect grammar or spelling or sentence structure generally isn't the problem. It's what you say at the time, how you say it, and how other people see you and how you come across to other people. That is the make or break. That is how people get an impression of you. That is how people see if you are a likable person, you want to be friends with them. That's how you might end up in conflict in a workplace, not if you've used the present perfect correctly. So, for me personally, and I don't know if Finn agrees here, it's about understanding the culture and the mentality of the people, which we will definitely do another episode on, rather than perfection. And we're going back to this word perfection again. Um, if you are speaking to a native speaker, it's so important. If you ever work with natives, if you ever plan on going to the UK or to America, learn about the culture. Learn about what's right, what's wrong, learn about the humor, learn about comedy, what's funny, what isn't, how do they speak? Because a native speaker, we are so confusing, aren't we, Finn? Even before talking about the vocabulary use. I was doing something today and someone was talking to me about something I really wasn't interested in. But what phrase did I use? Oh, that's interesting. How confusing, even though I meant it was incredibly boring. You're not going to get that through a textbook. You're not going to get that through having perfect grammar. It's through immersing yourself and integrating with that culture.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So the easiest way or the best way to make the biggest amounts of progress in short amounts of time is by making friends and spending time with those friends and watching what they do, listening to what they say, and copying it in a way, just doing what they do, saying what they say. And if you're not quite sure, or if there's a joke that they've made and you don't understand, then asking them. If you're asking your friend about, oh, is it best to use the present perfect or the past simple, or should I have used this conditional instead? They not only do they not care, they probably have absolutely no idea. So you're you're better off asking more about jokes, or maybe there's a cultural reference or something like that, or what a slang word means, so that you can maybe use it again, or next time someone mentions that cultural reference, you'll understand what's going on. You'll keep up with the conversation and you won't have to try and remember it to ask later or interrupt the conversation to ask then.
Mm. And one thing I will add to that is if you make friends with a native speaker, so even if you don't live in the UK, there's lots of ways to do this. We've spoken about this before. For instance, Instagram. We're both on Instagram, so feel free to pop up and say hi. We won't bite. So generally, when you get to know someone and they become your friend, I would always prioritize as much as you can um, communicating through like calling them or through like voice notes or through like video calls more than texting. Yes, over time, that can be reduced. But if you are worried about saying the wrong thing, text is gonna be not your friend because people can misread text all the time. You can't get tone from text. You can't get meaning from text. You can overthink if you read a text in a certain way. So get to know that person first. Maybe speak to them on the phone, send voice notes. You get to know their personality. Then when they text, if they text in a certain way, it might be A, they might not be feeling too good that day, or they just, like me, don't like texting. So you get a feel of what they're really like rather than basing your opinion on how they're texting you. I don't know what you think, Finn.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and right now I'm in Guatemala, and we've had to communicate with hosts of different apartments or hostels or rooms or whatever it is, and on text, it always seems very like angry in a way, or you're almost like, oh, they're a bit annoyed, or we better not do this. We need to make sure we do this. But then if you speak to them, or if you hear a voice note from someone, and their tone, like you say, their tone is just very friendly, even if the language is a bit more direct, for example, then it completely changes your perception of that person and how you feel about the situation.
Hmm. And I think the last point to make today is going back to grammar, is when a lot of students first start learning English, one of the first tenses they learn is the present simple and maybe the present continuous. And because it's learned really early on, a lot of students think these tenses are easy. How wrong they are. These two tenses are so important if you ever come to the UK, if you live here, if you work here, or even if you just come on holiday. I'll give you an example. If you go on a bus, I guarantee there will be maybe teenage girls gossiping, as we would call it, bitching. So talking about people in a negative way that aren't there. Listen to how they tell stories. Finn, you might be able to expand this. How do teenage girls, particularly teenagers as well, tell stories, even though it happened in the past, maybe several hours ago or a day ago?
Just mixing up grammar, just stories can be an absolute nightmare. And obviously, it depends on who's saying it. But I think the example that you've given here is probably the best one. Like younger teenage girls when they're gossiping or bitching. And I guess people in general, when they start ranting about things, when emotion comes out, then you're not thinking clearly about what you're saying and you don't care and it doesn't matter. And you're maybe using different tenses for emphasis or something like that. So, Joe, do you want to explain exactly the dialogue you had in mind?
Yeah, so generally, you'll probably hear from a lot of like prim and proper English teachers, don't say like all the time. But that's absolute bollocks, as I would say in the UK. Rubbish, not true. You will hear like all the time. And in this example, you will hear it. You will hear people say, well, I'm like, she was like, and he was like, so I'm like. So they're flicking between past tense, present tense, and then you'll hear things like instead of he said, she said, it's almost like he goes, and I'm like, and she was like, and then he says, then I say, and it's just like a back and forth. It's like a tennis match. And the reason why I brought this anecdote up is because I was in this situation. So I was on a bus into town and I had these two girls bitching behind me. And it was like, so I'm like, and she was like, and I was like, oh my God, like this and this. And I was putting, and in my head, I was framing it as though I was a non-native English learner. And I would have just been sat there like, what? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, well, you just did it then, actually. You said, and I would have just been. sorry, I would have just been like, oh, what's going on? So it's not just 14-year-old girls on the bus bitching about Tom and Jack at school. It's it's how we tell stories, and the word like is used. In my opinion, it is used too much, but it is used, and that's the important thing. It doesn't matter whether something's right or wrong, or used too much, or used maybe not enough. If it's used, then it's used, and that is fact, and you need to understand what it means. It doesn't mean you always have to use it yourself, especially if it's similar or like the word like, and it's not essential, then you don't have to use it. But it's important to understand how it's being used in that context.
Hmm. And just finally about storytelling. So my advice, if you want to tell a story and make it more inclusive to the people who are listening, don't use the past simple tense. Past simple is obviously in the past, so it makes it feel distant. So what native speakers like me and Finn would say is would use the present continuous. So it makes your audience, your listeners feel included. So instead of saying, I walked um I walked through town and then I wasn't paying attention and I fall over, which sounds a bit distant. It could be, I'm in town and I'm walking through town and I'm not paying attention. I trip over and fall right on my backside. So it makes it sound a bit more conversational, a bit more inclusive, and makes the people who are listening to your story feel part of it. And that is the present continuous being used at C2 level, which lots of people would think, hold on. That's the basic tense. So don't think of tenses as simple and hard because they can be used in different ways. And as we've just demonstrated there, don't go on textbook grammar. Go on what you hear. Don't worry about the rules. Don't worry about what tense it is. Just mimic, listen, and immerse.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess as a disclaimer, we should say if you are doing an English exam or you're doing something, preparing for something where correct English matters and is important and it will affect your result or grade, then yes, focus on it and worry about it and be very mindful of it. But for the majority of students in our cases, that's not what they're preparing for. They're preparing for everyday life and everyday conversations. So what we have said during this conversation applies.
Mm. And I think that is a perfect part to end. And um, last take home message, guys, is literally don't worry. Don't worry. You don't need to be perfect. I'm not perfect. Finn's not perfect. And every native British English speaker is not perfect. Clarity, confidence through speaking and making those connections are the most important thing about learning a language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the number one rule, do not panic. Do not panic. I think that's quite a nice place for us to finish up, isn't it? Simple three-word rule to live by and to carry with you when embarking on your English journey, when going through your English journey. So I've been Finn. Thank you very much for listening to my conversation with Joe. Joe, do you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, so nice to see you again, guys. Hopefully, you took something out of it. So, remember to like, subscribe, comment. Please leave a comment, even if it's a rude comment. I'll still read it. I'll probably go back home and cry, but it's a comment all the same. And if you want to see more of our content, we leave our Instagram handles on there so you can check out Finn, what he does. You can check out what I do. But most of all, I hope you're enjoying it, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much, guys. See you next week.